On April 1st, 1987, two brown paper bags were placed over the hands of a dead woman in Douglas County, Colorado. Standard protocol was to preserve trace evidence beneath her fingernails and nothing more. Then the case went cold. For 38 years, those bags sat sealed in a refrigerated vault while the man who strangled 30-year-old Rhonda Marie Fisher went on killing and was linked to more than 20 homicides across the Denver metro area. He died in prison, never charged for her murder. But those two paper bags were waiting for a technology that did not yet exist, and in 2025, they finally caught a serial killer. A rancher driving south on Perry Park Road noticed something out of place near the edge of a gravel turnout. The sun was just rising over Douglas County, Colorado, on April 1st, 1987, when the sheriff's deputies arrived at the scene. There, in the cold morning air, they found the body of a woman lying face up, her hands carefully covered by two plain brown paper bags. The location was remote, pastures and scrub oak stretching for miles, the nearest neighbor nearly a quarter-mile away. The woman showed no immediate signs of robbery. Her clothing was undisturbed, but the marks around her neck told a different story. The coroner's preliminary report would later confirm what deputies already suspected: death by strangulation. While the scene was being cordoned off, a team from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office began the slow, meticulous process of collecting evidence. The paper bags placed over her hands were standard procedure to protect any trace evidence like skin cells or fibers that might be caught beneath her fingernails. Every step was logged in the first responder notebook, including time of arrival, temperature, the condition of the body, and the evidence tags assigned to each item. The victim's purse was missing. No identification was found at the scene. By late afternoon, fingerprints confirmed her name: Rhonda Marie Fisher, age 30, a mother of two, from Denver. Her family was notified that evening. Rhonda's life had been marked by hard work and resilience. She was remembered by friends as kind, quick-witted, and fiercely protective of her children. Her last known whereabouts placed her near Colfax Avenue 2 nights earlier, a stretch of road that had become synonymous with danger for women in the city's margins. Detectives canvassed the area for witnesses, but leads dried up almost immediately. There were no tire tracks, no eyewitness accounts, and no clear motive. The brown paper bags were sealed and logged into evidence, a routine measure that would soon fade into the background as the investigation stalled. Weeks passed, then months, with no new information. In the sheriff's office, Rhonda Fisher's file was placed in a cold case drawer, joining a growing list of unsolved homicides. Yet inside those paper bags, microscopic traces waited, unseen, untouched, holding answers that no one in 1987 could yet imagine. Two brown paper grocery bags, uncoated and ordinary, became the silent stewards of evidence in the Fisher case. Deputies slipped them over Rhonda Fisher's hands at the scene, sealing each with a strip of evidence tape and logging their placement in the first responder's notebook. The bags themselves were nothing special, 10 by 12 inches, the kind found in any supermarket checkout. Yet once sealed, they served a purpose that went far beyond routine. Paper, unlike plastic, allows moisture to escape. That slows the growth of mold and preserves delicate biological traces, skin cells, fibers, even microscopic flecks of blood that might otherwise vanish in the hours and days after death. From the outset, every step taken with the bags was deliberate. Once removed at the autopsy, they were placed in a sterile, foil-lined evidence pouch and assigned their own tag number. The evidence technician logged the time, date, and chain of custody, then transferred the package to a temperature-controlled locker set at 4 degrees Celsius. The logs show a clear, unbroken chain from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, then back to the cold case unit decades later. Each transfer required a signature, a timestamp, and a physical inspection for tampering. The bags were never opened, never handled outside of gloved hands, never exposed to the open air. Over the years, as other items were tested or discarded, these two bags remained untouched, quietly gathering dust in a back corner of the evidence vault. For the technicians and evidence custodians, this was standard protocol. But in practice, their restraint and attention to detail preserved more than just paper. Inside those bags, the cells and fibers protected by their rough brown walls would become the foundation for a forensic breakthrough nearly 40 years later. The decision not to open, discard, or test the bags prematurely meant that when technology finally caught up, there was still something left to find. Even as Fisher's file slipped deeper into the cold case drawer, the bags waited, holding secrets that would outlast memory and suspicion. As the investigation faded from headlines, a simple act of preservation kept the possibility of answers alive, hinting at connections no one yet imagined. Vincent Darrell Groves was born in Denver in July of 1955, the oldest of three children in a home shadowed by instability. His childhood played out in neighborhoods just off Colfax Avenue, a stretch that, even then, divided the city's promise from its peril. School records from the late 1960s describe a boy with athletic talent, quick on the track, strong on the basketball court, but also a string of disciplinary write-ups for fighting, skipping class, and petty theft. By age 13, Groves had spent time in juvenile detention for breaking and entering, his name already familiar to local police. Colfax Avenue, where Groves spent much of his adolescence, was a corridor of contradictions. By day, buses and families moved between diners and storefronts. By night, the street became a magnet for those living on the margins, runaways, sex workers, and people trying to disappear. For Groves, Colfax offered anonymity and opportunity. He blended in, learning how to charm, how to intimidate, and, according to later psychological evaluations, how to hide his anger behind a practiced smile. After high school, Groves's athletic promise faded. A knee injury ended any hope of a college sports scholarship. He drifted through a series of jobs: warehouse loader, gas station attendant, short order cook, never staying long, always returning to Colfax. Police reports from the late 1970s note his presence in bars and motels along the avenue, often as a witness or a minor suspect in fights and theft. By his early 20s, Groves had developed a pattern of thrill-seeking and aggression, especially toward women. Friends and family described him as unpredictable, sometimes generous, sometimes withdrawn, sometimes frighteningly volatile. The boundaries between ordinary life and violence blurred. In the years that followed, Colfax would become the backdrop for a series of disappearances and unsolved assaults, each one leaving a thin paper trail through Denver's overburdened police files. The questions about Groves's true capacity for harm would linger unanswered as the city's homicide rate quietly rose. In the summer of 1979, Denver police responded to a string of violent deaths that would haunt detectives for decades. Joyce Ramey, age 23, was found in July. Her body left in an industrial park near East 56th Avenue and Havana Street. The cause was clear: ligature strangulation. Both of Ramey's hands were bound tightly with a strip of fabric. Forensic technicians noted an odd detail: traces of brown paper fibers clinging to her wrists, but the significance would only become clear years later. A month after Ramey's murder, Norma Jean Halford, 21, was discovered inside an abandoned vehicle on a mountain road outside Georgetown. Like Ramey, Halford had been strangled with a cloth ligature. Her hands were covered by a thin, paper-like material. The coroner's report documented skin cells beneath her fingernails and a faint dusting of paper fibers that matched the same craft paper found on Ramey. Investigators circled the similarities in their notes, but with no suspect and no physical evidence that could point to a killer, the case went cold. In November, the pattern repeated. Peggy Cuff, just 20, was left in an alley off South Ogden Street in Denver. The ligature marks on her throat formed a purse string pattern, and once again, paper fibers were found under her nails. This time, the lab confirmed the fibers came from a standard brown grocery bag, the kind used in supermarkets throughout the city. Detectives started a paper bag trace file, quietly linking these three women by the method of their deaths and the unusual forensic residue left behind. Despite the matching evidence, none of the cases yielded a viable suspect. The victims, Ramey, Halford, and Cuff, were young, each with families waiting for answers. Their stories faded from headlines, but the details endured in police files: hands bound or covered, brown paper fibers, death by strangulation. The pattern was clear to investigators, even if the man behind it remained a shadow. As the years passed, the question lingered. How many more would follow this signature, and would the link ever be proven? On September 30th, 1982, Vincent Darrell Groves stood before Judge William H. McAllister in Douglas County District Court. He was convicted of second-degree murder for the killing of 17-year-old Tammy Sue Woodrum. The sentence was 10 years in the Colorado State Penitentiary with parole eligibility after 5 years. At the time, Colorado's parole statute, section 18111, set the rules. For certain felonies, including second-degree murder, inmates could be considered for parole after serving just half their term, provided they kept a clean record and completed rehabilitation programs. Groves entered prison on October 2, 1982. Over the next 4 years, his disciplinary record remained clean. He completed the required vocational training and counseling, checking every box the system demanded. By statute, his case landed before the Colorado Parole Board in May 1987. The hearing was brief. 2 board members voted in favor of release, citing Groves' good behavior and the letter of the law. 1 member dissented, warning that Groves posed a high risk of reoffending, but the majority held sway, and the board's minutes recorded the outcome. Parole granted, effective June 15, 1987. Groves walked out of prison after 4 years, 8 months, and 13 days, less than half the time originally imposed. Within weeks, he returned to Denver, blending back into the shadows of Colfax Avenue. The statute that enabled his release was meant to reward rehabilitation. Instead, it opened the door for a violent offender to vanish into the city's margins, just as a new wave of unsolved attacks began to ripple through the metro area. The question of what might have been prevented had the warning been heeded remained unanswered as case files continued to stack up. 12 hours before Rhonda Fisher's body was found, Sheila Washington ran for her life down a Denver motel hallway. She was 20 years old, working late, and had just escaped a man who tried to strangle her in room 214. Washington described her attacker to police: tall, muscular, a snake tattoo curling around his left forearm, driving a battered Chevrolet with a dented rear fender. Her report, filed as Police Report 870215, was detailed, but it landed in a separate file, never cross-referenced with the Fisher homicide. In the emergency room, nurses photographed the bruises on her throat and the defensive wounds on her hands. Washington's voice, recorded in a later court transcript, was steady. His voice was deep. He threatened me with a knife before I got away. Within months, the violence escalated. In August 1988, Pamela Montgomery was found in a Denver alley, strangled. A month later, Diane Montoya Mancera's body turned up at a rural dump site in Douglas County. Both women showed signs of the same ritual: hands covered, ligature marks, traces of brown paper fibers. By October, a third woman, never publicly named, was discovered in Adams County, her case echoing the same pattern. Forensic techs began mapping these murders, overlaying locations along the Colfax Avenue corridor and nearby rural roads. The data pointed to a single, mobile predator. Detectives from Denver, Douglas, and Adams counties formed a task force, consolidating files from more than 20 unsolved strangulations dating back to 1978. Bayesian modeling and geographic analysis suggested a 93% probability that these cases were connected. Still, no suspect was named. The survivor testimony and the growing cluster of victims pressed investigators to look for a common thread, but the evidence remained circumstantial. In the cold case vault, the paper bags from Fisher's hands waited, unopened, untested, holding the answer to a question that would haunt detectives for decades. In March 2017, the two brown paper bags that had waited in evidence for 3 decades were sent to the Colorado State Forensic Lab. The goal was clear: extract whatever DNA might remain from the fragile skin cells pressed into the paper interior. Lab analysts used the PowerPlex kit, a standard tool for short tandem repeat profiling. The process began with a careful swab of the bag interior, followed by hours of chemical treatment to coax out any surviving genetic material. The analysts logged every step: case number, YLS, Chapter 2017, fish bag, chain of custody signatures, and temperature records from the evidence freezer. What they found was both promising and frustrating. The DNA was highly degraded, as expected after 30 years. The PowerPlex kit managed to recover a partial genetic profile, 7 out of the 16 core short tandem repeat loci. It was enough to confirm the presence of human DNA, but not enough to meet the threshold for entry into CODIS, the National DNA Database. The partial profile sat in limbo, unable to trigger a match or rule out a suspect. The analyst's notes reflected the mood in the lab. Hope flickered, but the science of 2017 had reached its limit. The paper bags were carefully resealed and returned to cold storage with a recommendation to preserve them for future testing. The evidence had given up a glimpse of its secrets, but not the full story. For the cold case team, the result was a near miss, a reminder that answers sometimes remain just out of reach, and that the smallest traces can still hold the key if technology can catch up. In October 2025, a forensic scientist at the State Crime Lab opened a new case file, LS 2025 Fishbag 02, and began a process that would finally answer questions left hanging for nearly 4 decades. The 2 brown paper bags from Rhonda Fisher's hands, untouched since the last extraction attempt in 2017, were placed inside a sterile hood. This time, the lab used a next-generation sequencing platform, a leap forward from the older VERSE-TR kits. The workflow started with whole genome amplification, multiplying even the tiniest fragments of DNA. Hybrid capture technology then targeted the 20-core CODIS loci, filtering out background noise and focusing on the genetic markers investigators needed. The sample, degraded by time but protected by careful storage, yielded more than anyone had dared hope. The sequencing run delivered a complete, high-confidence STR profile, 20 out of 20 loci, each one checked and rechecked against controls. The data were uploaded to CODIS, triggering an alert, a case-to-case hit. The profile from Fisher's evidence matched DNA recovered from 3 unsolved 1979 homicides, those of Joyce Ramey, Norma Jean Halford, and Peggy Cuff. Each of those women had been found with their hands bound or covered, each case long suspected to be the work of Vincent Darrell Groves. Now, the connection was no longer circumstantial. The odds of a random match at all 20 loci ran into the billions. On December 2nd, 2025, Sheriff Weekly stood before a crowded press room at the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. He read from a prepared statement, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of the years. The case of Rhonda Marie Fisher, unsolved since 1987, was closed. The DNA from the paper bags had identified her killer as Vincent Darrell Groves, linking her death to 3 others and bringing long-delayed answers to 4 families. When reporters asked about the significance, Weekly pointed to the evidence vault and said, "Sometimes justice waits in the smallest, most overlooked places." Yet even as the cameras flashed, the question lingered. How many more names might still be waiting in the files, their stories suspended until science and patience could finally meet? Today, thousands of sealed bags and folders still sit in evidence vaults across the U.S., each holding secrets, each waiting for science to catch up. As forensic technology advances, cases dismissed as unsolvable can yield answers, and names long forgotten can return to the record. Justice doesn't expire. It just waits, sometimes for decades, on a single overlooked clue. Share your thoughts on what justice means in cases like this below.